The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn of 47 Maple Drive as Paulina Matthews stood in her new kitchen, unpacking boxes marked "Fragile" in bold red letters. Through the window, she watched her husband Tom chat with one of their new neighbors, his confident stance and easy smile reflecting the success that had brought them to this affluent suburb of Boston. "This is exactly what we needed," she whispered to herself, carefully arranging her grandmother's china in the custom-built cabinets. The move had been sudden. Tom's new position as senior financial advisor at Morton & Reed came with a salary that made their previous life in Philadelphia seem like a distant memory. But something about the speed of it all left an uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach. A gentle knock at the back door interrupted her thoughts. Martha Williams, their next-door neighbor, stood there with a covered casserole dish. The woman's perfectly coiffed silver hair and pearl necklace screamed old money, but there was something guarded in her smile that made Paulina pause. "Welcome to the neighborhood, dear," Martha said, stepping into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. "I thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal while you're settling in." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail with an intensity that seemed excessive for casual curiosity. "That's very kind of you," Paulina replied, accepting the dish. "We've been overwhelmed by everyone's friendliness." Martha's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, we're a close-knit community here. We look out for each other." She lowered her voice, leaning closer. "How long have you known your husband, dear?" The question caught Paulina off guard. "We met 5 years ago in Philadelphia." "Why do you ask?" Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's just that, well, we've had some interesting characters move into this neighborhood over the years. The last family that lived in this house, they left rather abruptly." She paused, studying Paulina's face. "The husband worked at Morton & Reed too." Before Paulina could respond, Tom's voice boomed from the hallway. "Honey, where should I put these boxes marked office?" Martha straightened up immediately, her demeanor changing like a switch had been flipped. "I should let you get back to unpacking. But please, dear, if you ever need someone to talk to." She slipped a business card onto the counter. "I'm just next door." As Martha left through the back door, Tom entered the kitchen, his 6 feet 2 inches frame filling the doorway. "Making friends already?" he asked, setting down the boxes. "Yes, she brought us dinner," Paulina replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't mention Martha's strange comments or the way the woman had looked at her, with what seemed like pity. That evening, as they ate Martha's lasagna at their makeshift dining table, Paulina watched Tom scrolling through his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. She thought about the way he'd changed over the past few months, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious business trips, the new passwords on his devices. She'd attributed it all to the stress of the job transition, but Martha's words had planted a seed of doubt. "Tom," she said carefully, "tell me more about the previous family that lived here. Did you know them from work?" His fingers froze mid-scroll. For a fraction of a second, something flashed across his face, alarm. But it was gone so quickly, Paulina wondered if she'd imagined it. "Not really," he replied, his voice perfectly casual. "I heard they relocated overseas." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Martha mentioned them." Tom's jaw tightened slightly. "The neighbors here seem a bit too interested in everyone's business, don't you think? Maybe we should focus on settling in before getting too involved in the local gossip." Later that night, as Tom slept beside her, Paulina lay awake, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of their new house. Her phone buzzed softly, a text from her brother Michael. "How's the new place? Still coming to pick me up from the airport next week?" She typed back, "Yes, definitely. There's a lot I need to tell you." Rolling over, she studied Tom's sleeping face, trying to reconcile the man she married with the unsettling undercurrent she'd felt since arriving in this picturesque neighborhood. The moonlight filtering through their bedroom window cast strange shadows on the wall, and for a moment, they seemed to take the shape of bars across their bed. A car door slammed somewhere outside, followed by hushed voices. Paulina crept to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see two men in dark suits standing near a black sedan parked across the street. One of them looked up, and she quickly let the curtain fall back into place, her heart pounding. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with shifting shadows and half-heard conversations. In one particularly vivid moment, she saw Martha standing in their kitchen again, but this time the woman's words were clear: "The truth always comes out, dear. The question is, are you ready for it?" The next morning, as Paulina watched Tom leave for his first day at Morton & Reed, she noticed something unusual. Instead of turning left toward the financial district, his car turned right, heading in the opposite direction. She grabbed her phone to text him about it, then stopped herself. Something told her this wasn't a simple wrong turn, and that asking about it directly wouldn't get her the real answer. Opening her laptop, she began a search for Morton & Reed Financial Advisors. The company's website looked legitimate enough, but as she dug deeper, she found something odd. There were virtually no employee photos or profiles, no social media presence, and the office address listed seemed to change slightly across different business directories. The sound of a door closing downstairs made her jump. She was certain she'd locked up after Tom left. Heart racing, she grabbed her phone and crept toward the hallway. The floorboard near the top of the stairs creaked beneath her foot, and the footsteps below suddenly stopped. "Mrs. Matthews," a man's voice called up. "Sorry to startle you. I'm David Cooper, head of security for the neighborhood association. I'm just doing a routine check on new residents. Would you mind coming down for a moment?" Paulina descended the stairs slowly, her bare feet silent against the hardwood. David Cooper stood in her foyer, his crisp navy suit incongruous with the casual atmosphere of a suburban morning. He wasn't what she expected from a neighborhood security guard. His posture and alertness suggested military or law enforcement training. "Beautiful home," he commented, his eyes scanning the room with practiced efficiency. The previous owners did extensive renovations before they left. "Particularly interesting work in the office, state-of-the-art security features. Has your husband shown you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Tom hadn't mentioned anything about security features, and she'd yet to see inside his office. He'd insisted on setting it up himself, claiming he needed a precise organization system for his work documents. "I've been focused on the kitchen," she replied carefully. "Still unpacking?" Cooper nodded, but something in his expression suggested he'd gotten the answer he was looking for. "Well, if you notice anything unusual, suspicious vehicles, unexpected visitors, unusual patterns in your husband's schedule, please don't hesitate to call." He handed her a business card. "Day or night?" After he left, Paulina stood in the foyer, holding his card next to Martha's from the previous day. Two people, within 24 hours, offering help she hadn't asked for. The coincidence felt orchestrated, like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was meant to solve. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tom: "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." No explanation, no apology. Once, she would have accepted this without question. Now, standing in their too-perfect house with two cryptic business cards in her hand, something shifted inside her. The office door wasn't locked. Tom's careful habits usually included securing his workspace, but today, perhaps rushed by his mysterious schedule change, he'd forgotten. Paulina's hand trembled as she turned the knob, feeling like an intruder in her own home. The room was immaculate, too immaculate. No personal photos, no casual clutter. Just pristine furniture and a sleek laptop closed on the desk. The walls, as Cooper had mentioned, held subtle signs of recent work: new electrical outlets, sophisticated-looking air vents, a panel near the door that might have been for an alarm system. She started with the desk drawers, finding nothing but office supplies until she reached the bottom right. A false bottom, amateur enough that she could spot it, revealed a stack of documents. Her hands shook as she lifted them out. Passports. 3 of them, each with Tom's photo but different names. Credit cards that matched the aliases. A phone she'd never seen before. And beneath it all, a handwritten note in unfamiliar handwriting, exit strategy in place. Waiting for confirmation. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Paulina sank into Tom's chair, documents scattered across the desk before her, as 5 years of marriage reorganized themselves in her mind. Small inconsistencies she dismissed, questions he deflected, stories that didn't quite add up, they formed a new pattern now, one that turned her stomach. A car door slammed outside. Paulina scrambled to replace everything exactly as she'd found it, her heart thundering in her chest. Through the office window, she saw another black sedan, different from Cooper's, idling across the street. The man behind the wheel was watching the house. She made it back to the kitchen just as her phone rang. Michael, her brother. "Hey sis, slight change of plans. I can get an earlier flight tomorrow. That work for you?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Actually, that's perfect. There's something I need your help with." "Everything okay? You sound strange." "I'm not sure," she admitted, lowering her voice. I think I'm in trouble, Michael. Real trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Before she could answer, she heard a key in the front door. "I have to go. I'll tell you everything tomorrow. Just, be careful, okay?" Tom strode into the kitchen moments later, his earlier text forgotten. "Change of plans, dinner with the partners tonight. You'll need to dress up." He seemed energized, almost manic. "This is a big opportunity, honey. Everything we've worked for." Paulina looked at her husband, this man she'd shared a bed with, built dreams with, promised a lifetime to, and saw a stranger. "Of course," she heard herself say. "I'll go get ready." "That's my girl," he smiled, kissing her cheek. "Wear the blue dress, you know how I love you in blue." As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, she felt his eyes on her back and wondered if he could sense the change in her. If he knew that while she would put on the blue dress and smile through dinner, she was already gone. In the bathroom, she turned on the shower to cover any sound and quickly typed out a text to Michael. "When you land tomorrow, don't call. Come straight to the coffee shop on Oak Street. And Michael? Don't tell anyone you're coming." She deleted the message after sending it, then deleted it from her deleted messages. In the mirror, her reflection looked the same as it had that morning, but something fundamental had shifted. The woman who had blindly trusted was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival sometimes required a perfect performance. The sound of Tom's voice drifted up from below. He was on the phone, speaking too quietly for her to make out the words. She thought about the passports hidden in his desk, the watching cars, Martha's warnings, and Cooper's carefully worded questions. Whatever game was being played in this perfect suburban house, she was clearly a pawn. But pawns, she remembered, could become queens if they moved carefully enough. She stepped into the shower, letting the water mask the tears she couldn't hold back. Tomorrow, she would begin unraveling the lies. Tonight, she would play her part perfectly. The blue dress. The smile. The loving wife. After all, isn't that what Tom had taught her, without meaning to? That the best deceptions hide in plain sight. The partner dinner proved to be an elaborate performance of wealth and power, staged in a private room at LeBlanc, where crystal chandeliers cast shadows that danced like secrets across white tablecloths. Paulina sat beside Tom, watching him charm the room with practiced ease, and realized how much of their life together had been choreographed, each move calculated, each response measured. "Mrs. Matthews," Richard Morton himself addressed her, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority. "Tom tells us you used to work in art authentication. Fascinating field." She felt Tom tense slightly beside her, though his smile never wavered. It was the first test of many, she realized. They were watching her, measuring her responses, evaluating whether she posed a threat to whatever operation they were running. "Former life," she replied, taking a measured sip of wine. "Though I suppose those skills never really leave you, the ability to spot what's genuine and what's merely a convincing facade." The slight narrowing of Morton's eyes told her she'd pushed just far enough. Tom's hand found hers under the table, squeezing with what might have seemed like affection to observers but she now recognized as warning. Later that night, as they drove home in silence, Paulina studied her husband's profile in the darkness. The streetlights revealed glimpses of the man she'd married, the strong jaw she'd once traced with loving fingers, the eyes that had promised her the world. But now she saw the tension in his shoulders, the calculated precision of his movements, the way his gaze constantly checked the rearview mirror. "You were quiet tonight," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Just tired," she replied, matching his tone. "It's been an overwhelming few days." He nodded, accepting her explanation, and she wondered if he remembered how they used to talk, real conversations that sprawled for hours, dreams and fears laid bare in the safety of shared trust. When had that intimacy been replaced by this careful dance of half-truths? The next morning, Tom left early for a breakfast meeting. Paulina waited exactly 17 minutes before pulling out her phone and dialing her brother's number. "I'm at the airport," Michael answered immediately. "No one followed me." "What's going on, Paul?" "Not on the phone," she said quietly, though she'd already swept the house for obvious listening devices. "Just get here safely." "And Michael?" "Thank you for not asking questions." She spent the next 2 hours moving through her morning routine with deliberate normalcy, knowing the black sedan would be watching. Watering plants. Collecting mail. Chatting with Martha over the fence about garden fertilizer, all while her mind raced with possibilities and contingencies. The Oak Street Cafe was busy enough to provide cover but quiet enough for conversation. Michael was already there when she arrived, his military training evident in how he'd chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to all exits. The years of service had left other marks too, a new scar above his left eyebrow, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. "Okay, sis," he said as she sat down, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. "Talk to me." She told him everything, the strange warnings, the discovered documents, the too-perfect job and house that now felt like elaborate props in a production she hadn't auditioned for. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "This isn't amateur hour," he said finally. "The surveillance, the multiple identities, the financial sector cover, this has all the hallmarks of organized crime or worse. Whatever Tom's involved in, it's big." "I need to know what it is," Paulina replied, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Not just for my safety, but because I need to understand how much of it was real. How much of us was real." Michael's face softened. "Paul, you can't dash." "I have to," she cut him off. 5 years, Michael. 5 years of my life built on, what? I need to know if there was ever any truth beneath the lies." He studied her for a long moment, seeing perhaps not his little sister who needed protection, but the woman who had emerged from the chrysalis of deception, stronger, more determined, capable of calculating risks and accepting their consequences. "All right," he conceded. "But we do this smart. You maintain normalcy, nothing in your routine changes. Meanwhile, I'll set up surveillance of my own, reach out to some contacts who can help us dig deeper." "There's more," Paulina said, lowering her voice further. "Last night at dinner, something felt off. The way they were watching me, testing me. I think they're getting suspicious. And if they are, then we're on a clock," Michael finished. "How much time do you think we have?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from Tom, "Surprise lunch. Meet me at the office at 1. Want to show you where I work." She showed Michael the message, watching his jaw tighten. "It's a test," he said. "They're accelerating their timeline, whatever it is." Then I need to accelerate mine, Paulina replied, standing up. I'll go, maintain the facade. But first, I need to stop by the bank. Pole dash. The safety deposit box, she explained. If Tom's been using my art authentication background as part of whatever this is, there might be records. The only place I kept detailed notes from my previous work was in that box. Michael nodded slowly. Okay, but you check in every hour. And Pole? He caught her arm as she turned to leave. Be careful. Sometimes the most dangerous moment is when we think we're finally seeing clearly. As she walked to her car, Paulina felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The fear was still there, but it had transformed into something else, a sharp-edged clarity that cut through the fog of uncertainty. She thought of the young woman who had fallen in love with Tom's charming smile and confident promises, who had believed in the simple dream of a shared life. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that truth, like art, required careful examination to distinguish genuine from forgery. And she was ready to put all her skills to the test. The Morton and Reed offices occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown tower, all chrome and glass that reflected the autumn sunlight like mirrors. Paulina stood in the lobby, watching her distorted reflection fracture and reassemble in the polished surfaces. The woman looking back at her wore confidence like armor, tailored blazer, subtle makeup, wedding ring catching the light. A woman who belonged in this world of power and pretense. Security was everywhere, though carefully disguised as customer service. The guard who checked her ID smiled too professionally, his eyes lingering on her face a beat too long. The receptionist who called up to Tom's office spoke in coded pleasantries that felt rehearsed. Even the elevator required a special key card for certain floors. Tom met her in the reception area of the 14th floor, his smile genuine enough to make her heart ache. For a moment, she saw him as she had 5 years ago, the man who had quoted poetry over coffee, who had held her through her father's funeral, who had promised to build a life of shared dreams. Welcome to my world, he said, leading her through a maze of identical corridors. Every office they passed was occupied by men and women performing what looked like ordinary financial work, yet something felt off. The computer screens angled just so, the conversations that hushed as they passed, the way everyone's eyes followed them with careful assessment. Tom's office was a corner suite with views of the harbor. Beautiful, isn't it? He asked, watching her take in the sophisticated decor. Everything we worked for. Everything we lied for, she thought but didn't say. Instead, she smiled, moving to the window. It's perfect, she replied, and in the reflection, she saw relief flash across his face. He'd been worried about her reaction. Testing her. The partners are impressed with how well you're settling in, he continued, coming to stand behind her. His hands settled on her shoulders, familiar yet foreign. They think you'll be a valuable addition to the family. The word choice wasn't accidental. Family. Not company. Not team. The implications sent a chill down her spine. I had lunch with Richard Morton's wife last week, she said carefully, watching his reflection. Caroline. She mentioned something interesting about art investments. Tom's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. Did she? About how certain pieces can be useful for value adjustment. Made me think about my old work in authentication. She turned to face him, studying the micro-expressions that flickered across his face. You never seemed very interested in that part of my life before. For a moment, something raw and honest crossed his features, regret. Fear. But then the mask slipped back into place. People change, honey. I'm interested in everything about you now. The double meaning hung between them like smoke. Before she could respond, his office phone rang. The caller ID showed only numbers, no name. Sorry, have to take this, he said, already reaching for the handset. Why don't you explore the floor? Everyone's excited to meet you. She recognized the dismissal for what it was. As she closed his office door, she heard him answer in what sounded like German, a language he'd never mentioned speaking. The floor was a labyrinth of identical corridors and glass-walled offices. Paulina walked slowly, cataloging details. The security camera's blind spots. The service elevator at the far end. The keypad-protected server room. Everything speaking to an operation far more sophisticated than simple financial advisory services. A door opened ahead, and Caroline Morton emerged, elegant in cream silk and pearls. Her surprise at seeing Paulina seemed genuine, but there was something else in her expression, a flicker of what might have been concern. "Paulina, dear," she said, moving closer. "How lovely to see you." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Are you free for coffee tomorrow? There are things you should know. Things I wish someone had told me 20 years ago." Before Paulina could respond, another door opened. Richard Morton stood there, his imposing frame filling the doorway. "Caroline," he said, his tone pleasant but brooking no argument. "The car's waiting." Caroline's face smoothed into practiced serenity. "Of course, darling. Paulina, it was wonderful to see you." She squeezed Paulina's hand as she passed, pressing something into her palm, a small key. Back in Tom's office, she found him ending another call, this one in what sounded like Russian. "Everything okay?" he asked, watching her carefully. "Perfect," she replied, slipping the key into her pocket. "Though I should go, I have that dental appointment, remember?" He didn't challenge the lie, though she knew he must have memorized her schedule. "Dinner at home tonight?" "I'll cook." The ordinary domesticity of the offer almost broke her. How many evenings had they spent like that, sharing meals and stories, while beneath the surface, he'd been weaving webs of deception. "Wouldn't miss it," she said, kissing his cheek. As she pulled away, she caught a glimpse of his computer screen, a document minimized too slowly. Banking numbers, she thought. Swiss accounts. In the elevator, she finally looked at what Caroline had slipped her, a small safety deposit box key, different from any she'd seen before, with an unfamiliar bank's logo. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael, "Found something. Big. Meet now." She typed back a single word, "Yes." As she crossed the lobby, she felt eyes following her, security guards, receptionists, men in suits trying too hard to look casual. She kept her pace steady, her expression neutral. Inside, her mind was racing, putting pieces together. The key. The accounts. Caroline's warning. Tom's languages. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and coming rain. She walked 2 blocks before sliding into the passenger seat of Michael's rental car, parked exactly where they'd planned. "What did you find?" she asked as he pulled into traffic. He handed her a folder. "You better see for yourself." "But Paul." His voice was grim. "Whatever you thought this was. It's worse." Rain began to fall as Paulina studied the documents in Michael's folder, each page revealing another layer of the elaborate deception she'd been living within. The steady drumming against the car roof matched the rhythm of her heartbeat, grounding her in the moment as her world shifted once again. "They're using art fraud to launder money," she said quietly, her trained eye recognizing the patterns in the transaction records. High-end pieces, masterfully forged, authenticated through seemingly legitimate channels. "My God, they've been planning to use my background in authentication all along." Michael navigated through downtown traffic, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The art is just the surface," Paul looked deeper. She turned another page and felt her breath catch. Wire transfers. Shell companies. Connections to names she recognized from international news headlines, oligarchs, corrupt officials, organizations that dealt in human suffering. Morton and Reed wasn't just a front for money laundering, it was the financial backbone of something far darker. "How long have you known about this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. I had suspicions when you first told me about Tom's job offer. The speed of the promotion, the immediate relocation, the excessive surveillance, it fit patterns I'd seen during my time in intelligence. But this? He gestured at the folder. This goes deeper than anyone suspected. Paulina closed the folder, letting her mind process what she'd learned. The rain intensified, transforming the world outside into an impressionist painting of blurred lights and moving shadows. Like one of the forgeries she used to expose, everything familiar had become strange and uncertain. I should have seen it, she said, more to herself than Michael. All those business trips to countries known for financial opacity. The way he always steered conversations away from my work in authentication. He wasn't just hiding his true nature from me, he was grooming me for a role in their operation. This isn't your fault, Michael replied firmly. People like this, they're experts at creating perfect facades. They choose their marks carefully, build trust over years. The fact that you started noticing the inconsistencies so quickly after the move. That's not weakness, Paul. That's strength. She thought about Caroline Morton's warning, the key burning a hole in her pocket. They're not just criminals, she realized. They're collectors. They collect people, their skills, their reputations, their potential usefulness. And once you're in for life, Michael finished grimly. Or until you're no longer useful. The implications hung heavy in the air. Paulina thought about the previous family that had lived in their house, their sudden overseas relocation. Had they discovered too much? Or had they simply outlived their usefulness? Her phone buzzed, a text from Tom, picked up ingredients for dinner. Your favorite, cocoa vin. Don't be late. The casual domesticity of the message struck her like a physical blow. How many meals had they shared, trading stories about their days, while he carried these secrets? How many nights had she fallen asleep in his arms, trusting in the safety of their shared life, while he orchestrated financial crimes that ruined lives? I have to go back, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Michael turned to her sharply. Like hell you do. We have enough here to go to the authorities. No, she cut him off. We don't. Not yet. What we have proves criminal activity, yes, but it's fragmentary. We need more, the full scope of their operation, their client lists, their methodologies. And there's something else. She pulled out Caroline's key. I think there are others inside who want this exposed. People who feel trapped, who need a way out. It's too dangerous, Michael argued, but she could see him weighing the strategic logic of her words. I'm already in danger, she replied calmly. The moment I started asking questions, started noticing discrepancies, they've been watching me, testing me. If I run now, I'll never stop running. But if I stay, play the role they expect. She traced the bank logo on the key. I can find what we need to bring it all down. The rain was easing now, patches of late afternoon sun breaking through the clouds. Paulina watched a young couple hurry past their parked car, sharing an umbrella, laughing at some private joke. Once, she had been that innocent, that trusting in the simple poetry of shared moments. Give me 3 days, she said, turning back to Michael. Caroline gave me this key for a reason. The bank opens tomorrow morning. I'll find what's in that safety deposit box, continue gathering evidence from Tom's office, and document everything. You focus on building a secure channel to the right authorities, someone who can't be bought off or scared away. Michael studied her face for a long moment, seeing perhaps not his little sister who needed protection, but a woman who had found her own kind of strength in the ruins of betrayal. 3 days, he agreed finally. But you check in every 6 hours, and at the first sign that they suspect I'll get out, she promised. But I need to do this, Michael. Not just to expose them, but for myself. To prove that they didn't break me, they just showed me how strong I really am." As she gathered her things to leave, Michael caught her hand. "Pole. What are you going to do about dinner tonight?" A sad smile crossed her face. "I'm going to go home and watch my husband cook coq au vin. I'm going to smile and ask about his day. I'm going to play the role of the perfect, trusting wife one last time." Her voice hardened with quiet determination. "And then I'm going to dismantle the life he built on lies, piece by carefully documented piece." The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the air clean and sharp with possibility. As Paulina walked the careful route back to her car, she felt a profound sense of clarity. The woman who had moved into that perfect house on Maple Drive just weeks ago was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that sometimes the greatest act of self-love was choosing truth over comfort, justice over safety. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Tom: "Don't forget wine on your way home." She texted back a simple, "Of course, honey," and allowed herself a moment of grief for the life she had thought they shared. Then she straightened her shoulders and began to plan her next move. After all, Tom had taught her well, the best deceptions were hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the comfortable routines of ordinary life. The morning light painted long shadows across the kitchen floor as Paulina prepared coffee, moving through the familiar routine one last time. 3 days had passed like scenes from a play she'd been rehearsing her whole life, smiling through dinners, maintaining the perfect facade of normalcy while methodically gathering the evidence that would bring everything crashing down. Caroline's safety deposit box had contained exactly what they needed: detailed records of transactions, client lists, and most crucially, evidence of the organization's involvement in international crimes that went far beyond financial fraud. The woman had been building her case for years, carefully documenting everything while playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. "You're up early," Tom's voice came from the doorway, and Paulina felt the familiar ache of what could have been. He stood there in his running clothes, sweat gleaming on his forehead, looking so much like the man she'd fallen in love with that for a moment her resolve wavered. "Couldn't sleep," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "One last act of domestic tenderness. Big day at the gallery." He accepted the cup with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "About that, I think you should postpone the gallery opening. Things at work are complicated right now. It might be better if we kept a lower profile for a while." The warning in his voice was clear, though carefully wrapped in concern. They knew. Or at least, they suspected. Paulina felt an odd sense of calm settle over her as she realized this moment had been inevitable from the start. "Tom," she said softly, studying his face. "When did you stop believing in us? Not the performance, not the perfect life you constructed, but us, the real us?" Something flickered across his features, pain, regret, or perhaps just surprise at her directness. "Everything I did was for us," he started, but she cut him off with a gentle shake of her head. "No. Everything you did was for them. The life we built together was just a convenient cover story." She moved toward the window, where the first hints of dawn were painting the sky in shades of possibility. "You know what I realized this week? I've been grieving for a marriage that never really existed. The man I loved was a character you played brilliantly, but he wasn't real." Paulina there was real fear in his voice now, not for himself, but for her. Despite everything, some part of him had cared, even if it wasn't enough to choose truth over power. "It's done, Tom," she said quietly. "The evidence is already with the authorities. The real authorities, not the ones Morton has in his pocket. They're moving in now, not just here, but across 3 continents. The whole network, all the shell companies, all the laundered money in forged art and ruined lives. It's over." As if on cue, sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer. Tom's face drained of color as he realized the magnitude of what she was saying. "You don't understand what you've done," he whispered. "These people, they'll never stop." "I understand exactly what I've done," she interrupted, her voice steady. I chose truth over fear. Just like Caroline did. Just like others within the organization who helped us gather evidence. Your mistake was thinking that the people you collected and controlled would always choose safety over justice. The sirens were deafening now. Through the window, she could see federal vehicles converging on the house, their lights painting the perfect suburban street in flashing red and blue. Tom moved toward his office, toward the escape route she knew he had planned, but stopped when she spoke again. They're at every exit, Tom. Michael made sure of that. It's better if you don't run. She finally turned to face him fully. Show me that at least this one thing can be real between us. Choose to end it with dignity. For a long moment, he stood frozen between flight and surrender. Then, slowly, he sank into a kitchen chair, looking suddenly old and very human. I did love you, he said quietly. Maybe not in the beginning, when you were just part of the plan. But somewhere along the way, it became real for me too. I know, she replied, and was surprised to find she meant it. That's what makes this both harder and necessary. The front door burst open, federal agents flooding into the house with practiced efficiency. Tom allowed himself to be handcuffed without resistance, his eyes never leaving Paulina's face. She watched with a strange mixture of grief and relief as they led him away, this man who had been both her greatest love and her greatest lesson in strength. Hours later, she stood in Martha's kitchen, where it had all begun with a warning wrapped in a casserole dish. You knew, she said simply. The older woman nodded, pouring them both tea. We all knew something. Caroline, me, others in the community. But knowing isn't the same as having the courage to act. You did what many of us couldn't, you chose truth, no matter the cost. Paulina wrapped her hands around the warm teacup, thinking of the long days ahead, the investigations, the testimonies, the process of rebuilding a life on her own terms. The cost was worth it, she said finally. Not just to stop them, but to reclaim myself. And now? Martha asked softly. What will you do with your freedom? Through the window, Paulina could see her former house, now wrapped in crime scene tape. The perfect facade couldn't hide the truth anymore, just as her own carefully constructed life had crumbled to reveal something stronger underneath. Now, she said, a small smile playing at her lips, I'm going to live my life in truth. No more perfect performances, no more accepting comfortable lies. Just me, building something real, one choice at a time. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, warming her face. In the distance, she could hear children playing, cars passing, the ordinary rhythm of life continuing despite the extraordinary events of the day. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first moved to this street, seeking a perfect life, and the woman she'd become, stronger, wiser, more authentically herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. She had learned that strength wasn't about being unbreakable, but about having the courage to break free from the beautiful cages we sometimes build around ourselves. Her story wasn't ending, it was finally, truly, beginning.